All right, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about creative coding, and there were some questions in the last presentation about imposter syndrome and about not feeling qualified and job descriptions and things like that. And so real quickly, in my experience, I've been working in technology and in the creative space for 23 years. A lot of job descriptions can sometimes feel like takeout orders from where the place is, where they've decided that they're going to expand the role, they need somebody to come on, and then they ask everybody in their department or multiple departments what skills they want, and they immediately like need one person that does everything, which is not realistic ever. So what I like to do is I like to look at job descriptions almost as a syllabus, and if you start to talk about the job with them, just as Katie was talking about before, I think that's really a good way to move forward. Instead of don't disqualify yourself, let them disqualify you. And I have a personal story about that as we move forward. So that's just my advice. If it's something that you're interested in, inquire about it. And at the very least, even if you get a no, you might learn about some areas of growth that you can try, so that maybe you take another class, maybe you do another project that kind of moves your needle forward. So anyhow, I'm going to be talking about creative coding. Thank you very much for having me here. I'm so excited to be a part of this presentation. If you have any questions for me, I'd love to talk with you. This is my email address. Feel free to reach out to me. I will also give my slides. So one of my main tools and themes I'm going to be talking about tonight is tinkering. And that has been a big part of creative coding for me throughout the time that I have been doing what I'm doing. And what do I do? Well, I'm a business owner. I run a creative technology studio called Viable Industries, and we build and design tools, systems, and software. We focus on workflows, visualizations, and rescue missions. My background is all over the place. I originally went to art school and I got a 2-year degree. And then from there, I found my way into web development and web design. And it kind of exploded from there, from all the different projects and the different places that I worked on. So over the course of my working career, it's been a lot. And I first started working when I was really, really young, 31 years ago, when I started with a paper route. This is the first dollar I ever earned. And since then, I have held so many different positions. I've been a designer, a developer, an animator, an envelope stuffer, a retail associate, a writer, a marketer, a maker, a screen printer, an entrepreneur. There have been so many different positions that I have held over the course of the last 23 years. And if I've learned anything about those experiences, is that different projects and different people and your network can kind of take you into lots of different wonderful opportunities. So how did this happen? Well, as I mentioned, I went to art school. I didn't know that there was all kinds of like web stuff, but at the end of my schooling, I went to my career counselor, and there was a job opportunity to become a web developer. I had done a little bit of writing HTML. I applied for the job, I got it, and then I just started doing lots of project work. And that project work led to other project work, and that project work led to more project work. And the more that I did those kinds of things, I started to work with people. And as that network expanded, they kind of remembered that I worked on stuff, and then they would pull me into things later on. And then my relationship started to grow. And as my relationship started to grow and the more projects that I got even more projects. And it started to build up enough that I run my own business now. And so what I think about, like, if I'm going to take on a new project, sometimes I might take on something that's a little ambitious because it's something interesting and I might be crazy enough to try it. But there also might be moments where I'm like, that's a little bit beyond what my scope of expertise is. That's not something I might do. So I might back out of it, or I might partner up with somebody else. But when I'm brave enough to try to take that on, how I measure whether or not it's something that I think I can do is tinkering. And so what I want to do now is kind of tell a brief story about where my tinkering began. So a long, long time ago, when I was super little, before I was a developer or an educator or anything like that, my family knew me as ornery, bashful, and curious. And even though they may have described me as fearless, I wasn't. I was more naive, and I lived inside of my own imagination. So back then I was like 5 or 6, like kindergarten age, and I got a hold of this thing here, and I recognized that this is ancient technology, but to me it was amazing. This is a Commodore VIC-20, and I spent tons of hours with this thing. So that was the first computer I ever used, and I mostly made nonsense. This here, this tape cassette, if you even know what a tape cassette is, this is what the hard drive looked like. And then this is what the screen looked like. You would write code that would say 1, print 2, go to 1, and then you could print screen things on the screen. And I used to do this at school all the time. It was almost like graffiti in a way. And I would like take over the computer and I would like write messages, and none of the teachers knew what to do because computers are pretty new at that time. And I felt pretty much like a rock star. Like everybody in class was like super impressed. And so I liked that attention. So I started to go back and do more. And what I did is I noticed that this tape cassette looked a lot like my boombox. Now I also realized that I'm pretty old and you might not know what a boombox is, but back in the day, we used to have these awesome things that were before iPads. Some people would carry them around with them as like personal stereos, and they were amazing. You could record your own radio stations, and it was really awesome. So I knew that tape cassette looked like something I had seen before in a different context, but it was also being used in this data context. So I took the tape cassette that I had there and I put it inside my boombox, and what I heard were these high-pitched beeps. I was like, wait a minute, what is that all about? That almost sounds like music. So I decided that I would recreate those boops and beeps, and I made my own tones. I just kind of like recorded them with my mouth, and I put them back into the computer, and I loaded it up, and what I got was something like this. It was an error, but it blew my mind. It blew my mind that I could create something that was not the initial intent, and I felt like I had like made contact with another being. I was communicating with a robot. It didn't like the things that I was saying, but it was a very foundational moment for me and how I've approached writing code throughout the rest of my life. It's not just about the documentation or just about the syntax. It's about context. It's about removing context. It's about experimentation, having imagination to try different things. And in order to stomach that process, you're going to fail a lot. And that's totally okay, because if you're going to write code, you're going to write more code that doesn't work than you will write code that does work. That's just how it goes. Your role as somebody that writes code is to be a translator. You're taking human ideas and you're translating that into instructions that the computer can understand. And it might take time to learn the language or the pattern or the paradigm. And tinkering is one way that you can kind of like get some of those skills down. Even if you fail over and over and over again, it's not true failing. It's just like, oh, that idea didn't work. Maybe try this. And almost always, it's syntax that's going to get in your way. It's like a comma or a period or a bracket's in the wrong place. It's usually never the overall concept or idea, until you start to get to like high level stuff like crazy algorithms and stuff like that. But at the base level, syntax is going to get in your way. So if you keep trying and manipulating, you might get it right. And when you do, it feels the best. There's nothing better than like working through a problem and trying something and just like throwing it at the wall and reading documentation and figuring out like, oh, maybe I can apply that within my context. And it absolutely works. I had one of those experiences earlier today. I'm working on a geospatial API, and we're like doing like a filtering system for it. And I was trying something and it wasn't going the way that I wanted. I was getting kind of bummed out. And then I started to like seek out and read some other documentation. And I found something I didn't know about, and which I would have never stumbled upon unless I would have failed a bunch of times. So I started to implement that, and it didn't work at first. And then around lunchtime, I got it working, and it's like the best feeling in the world. So I live and die by tinkering, by playing the what if game. Like without it, I would be without a job and I would be totally lost. And I think now more than ever, you kind of need to have the guts and optimism to just try and allow that feedback loop to work in your favor, because it's so fast. You can try something and see nearly immediately if it's going to work. failing over and over, but trying every possible way is something that has really worked for me. And I cannot recommend it enough, especially in an era now where there are things like this. I don't know if you're familiar with all the AI that's happening. There's so many new AI that are coming out almost daily, but this is ChatGPT. You can just basically use like natural language, type some prompts into it, and hit enter. And it will spit out code. Code's not bad either. It's not too bad. But it doesn't have the right context. So now more than ever, code and technologies are just tools. We need creative people using them in new and in different ways. So if you are creative, you will be more in demand than just memorizing a bunch of trivia on how the syntax works. I don't know if you know who this is, but this is Tim Berners-Lee. There's no way. He's basically the father of the internet in the sense that he created HTML and he created the first web server. And there's no way that Tim Berners-Lee would have predicted back in the 90s that we would be buying cars on the internet, or transactions for houses or groceries or banking, or even browsing the web on things like your tablets, watches, or fridges. Things are changing so quickly, and experimentation and tinkering and trying out some of these new arenas is one way to get your foot in the door, and maybe an avenue that you never even knew about. Internet of Things is a really fun place to kind of experiment. And so you can write code to entertain you. You can make games. You can write code for fun, for expression. You can write it to solve business problems, to create applications. You can write it for modeling. So this is Daniel Schiffman. He's one of my favorite creative coders that are out there. And he does all kinds of really cool stuff, like teaching you how to do simulations. And so this simulation is called flocking. And all of this is done in JavaScript. And it's mimicking patterns of like how birds might move together. It's really, really wild. So as I mentioned, these days, it seems like technology is limitless, and it can be easy to get overwhelmed. And one of the things I do to kind of center myself on like, hey, what's happening is there's this thing that I look at all the time called the TIOBE index. And it changes from year to year on the popularity of certain languages. I'm not entirely sure how they measure this, but I find it pretty fascinating that Python was definitely not in first place like 4 or 5 years ago. JavaScript is still pretty high. It's at number 7 recently. And the assembly language, like machine code, is in the top 15. And I find that to be incredibly interesting. So if you're trying to be marketable within the industry, maybe you look at things like this as an indicator to say like, oh, I'm studying JavaScript. Well, that's something that's like that seems to be in demand. A lot of people are interested in it. Same thing with Python, or Java and C++ seem to never go out of style. So anyhow, that's something that I kind of look at. And then there's almost a new AI every single day. It's really fun to just check them out and see what's going on. I don't know that necessarily AI is going to take people's jobs, but I do think that people that are using AI will start to phase out some positions because it's increasing the boring stuff, like data collection, data aggregation. And I don't think that we've quite gotten to the point where it's entirely useful yet. I feel like it's the early days of creating apps when, the iPhone had apps that were just like lightsabers and really silly stuff. I think it's going to take some creativity from people like you to kind of build out those, the context and the uses for these tools that we have available to us. So how do you make sense out of all of this? Well, what I do is I get curious, I create a personal project, and I start tinkering. That's my flow. And when I break down what tinkering is to repair, adjust, or work with something in an unskilled and experimental manner. And I love this part, unskilled, because it means I don't need to be an expert. I don't have to lead anything. I can just try it out. And if it's something that works for the work that I'm doing or something that I'm interested in. Maybe it's even just a hobby. That's completely okay. And when we take unskilled and kind of break that down, lacking technical learning and training, that's totally okay. But if you want to make that jump from being a tinkerer to something that's more skilled, I follow I think about these 4 things to kind of jump my skill level up to that next level when I want to take it beyond tinkering, and maybe I do want to ascend into a level of expertise. I think about the Dreyfus model, and the Dreyfus model is a pyramid that you kind of build on experience to get to the expert level. And I don't think that I'm an expert in anything by any stretch of the imagination. I've been doing a lot of stuff for a long time, but the more I learn that I don't know what there's just more that I don't know. But what helps me when I think about this, especially when I'm doing something new, is when I'm attempting something like a new programming language, I really cling to what the syntax or the rules are, or to the trivia. And that's an indicator that, like, I don't really know how to think beyond whatever. I'm just following a tutorial, and I can only do what somebody kind of dictates. But as you start to move up that experience level, as you use it more, as you try more things out, you start to understand, like, okay, I see this code and I see that code. The context is not right. In order for this to work, I need to tweak this a little bit. And then you start to become like a little bit more proficient. And then you become, you start to climb the ladder into competence. And that's when we were talking about imposter syndrome. You start to cope with imposter syndrome. And what I love about something that I heard recently related to imposter syndrome was a quote about elite athletes and reporters. And so before big games, elite athletes are asked, how do you feel? Are you nervous? And the symptoms that they have is their heart is racing, their palms are sweaty, and there's like butterflies or some level of anxiety that's happening. And the athletes almost always say, like, I am excited. This is something that I want to do. The reporters, when asked in a similar way, who are not elite athletes, they describe it as nervousness, and their symptoms are sweaty palms, anxiety, increased heart rate. And so all the symptoms look like they're entirely the same way, but the elite athlete has been doing this thing so long, for over and over and over, with such rate of repetition, that they have almost retrained what those symptoms are to feel excitement instead of despair. And I feel very similar about imposter syndrome. There are a lot of things that I don't know, that, oh my gosh, there's basically everything in the world that I don't know. But instead of getting freaked out by it, my response now is to get excited that I'm going to learn something new. This is another tool I can add to my tool belt, or I might learn that's really awesome and it's not for me. Next, let's move on to something else. So as you move up from competence, then you have the ability to kind of sort out, like, these are the things that are important, these are the things that are not important. And then when you get to the expert level, you can kind of like realize that there are rules that you can break and you don't necessarily have to follow the rules. I don't know that I'm ever going to get to the expert level, but when I think about learning something new, trying to get myself at least to that competence level makes me, I don't know, it gives me a little bit of comfort. Another thing that I think about is something that Merlin Mann said. So he had a podcast back in the day called Back to Work, and he basically said that people who are effective solve the right problem at the right level with the right solution. And so that might mean that the knowledge that you have today, you do the best that you can, and that is absolutely okay. And maybe 2 years from now or 6 years from now, you might look back and think, like, man, I could totally do that better. Of course, you should be able to do that better if you have 6 more years of expertise, but it's not that you did it wrong. You did the best at what you were doing at that time. And if it was accepted by the person in which you created the artifact for, then there should be no guilt or remorse for that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And I really think about that now. Before I made the leap to kind of work on my own, I coveted the skill sets that I've developed over the course of the last 7.5 years working for myself. And it feels so great to be on that other side. And I try to remind myself of that as often as possible, like where I was before to where I am now, and to be grateful, to embrace that, and to continue moving forward. The third thing that I think about is the state of flow. And if I'm working on something and I'm feeling like not all about it, it's probably because it takes a low skill level, and the challenge is also not very high. So maybe it's like data entry or something that is not really challenging. And for me to recognize that, try to change my mindset, maybe create a reward system or something to help me get through whatever that thing is. It helps me make better choices and decisions about the work that I'm doing. Conversely, if I'm working on something and then all of a sudden I start to freak out, it's usually because something I perceive to have a high level of skill, and I have a low level of skill rather, but it is the challenge level is really high. And maybe it's like a server thing or a configuration thing that's just out of my depth of knowledge, and something goes incorrect. Like all of a sudden my heart starts racing and I start to freak out. And it's good to know in that moment, like, okay, the thing that I need right now to cure this is I need to improve the amount of skill that I have. So I can either look it up, I can contact somebody who has a greater level of skill, and that can help reduce my anxiety. And where I'm really doing like some of the work that I love the most is when there's like a level of challenge to what's going on and I have a level of skill. It feels like time just melts away. It's one of my favorite states of being in the state of flow. So when I recognize that I'm not in these moments, I have tactics to kind of pull me out of like the boredom or the apathy or the anxiety. The last thing that I think about, and there's a link to this, I'm not going to play the video right now, is Ira Glass has this really great quote about your taste in the gap between your taste. And so oftentimes as beginners, we might have really good taste and we start to make stuff and we kind of grow bummed out because the things that we're making are not to the level of taste that we have. And we just kind of like suck for a while, for a long while, actually. And you kind of have to fight through the terrible stuff that you're making and break through to the other side to gain enough skill to close the gap between your taste and the thing that you're making. And then eventually you meet it and you can be lucky enough to break through. And that's where the magic really happens. And so when I'm looking to learn a new skill, when I'm looking to be creative in the problems that I'm solving, I'm thinking all the time about the flow. I'm thinking about solving the right problem at the right level. Like maybe I could do this crazy thing, but you know what? For this thing right now, all we really need to do is this. This is what the expectations are. Let's just solve that there, but maybe I can experiment with something later. And maybe what I need is I need a little bit more knowledge so I can start to climb up this pyramid because my skill level is not meeting where my tastes are. So anyhow, that's what I have to say about that thing there, because my greatest fear is that I'm going to run into something that I don't know, and then somebody will see it, and then they're going to call me out on it, and then I'm going to be busted, and then I'm going to feel terrible about it. Somebody might say like, hey, you didn't know that? I thought you did this for a living. That's pretty crazy. And then I will feel horrified. But the truth is that has happened to me. And almost every time that it's happened, it's usually because some other nerd or somebody that is like interested in the kinds of things that I'm interested in, they're just trying to show me something cool so that we can either collab on it or try something new. And it's almost never a bad thing to kind of be like knocked down your pedestal every now and again, because it will show you new and interesting things. It might suck in the moment, but if you can calm down and allow yourself to be vulnerable and open up, there's an entire world out there that you can learn about that you might not know about otherwise. So I say it is totally okay to be a novice. You don't need to be an expert to try, because if you did, you couldn't even start. So when I'm thinking about tinkering and those four things before, my framework on gathering that skill and getting better is basically this. There's a spark, I do some research, I play, and I reflect. So here's a quick story on how this actually applies. I was about 21 at my very first job, and it was, I don't know, the year 2000, I want to say. And we're working on an e-commerce store for this IBM platform. And my boss, he goes on vacation. And the big boss, the owner of the company, comes knocking on my door. He's like, "Hey, I need you to like set up the storefront with all the subcategories." And I was like, "Carl, he's on vacation." And he's like, "But I don't care. This needs to get done." And so he handed me 3 manuals, and I had to figure out how to put this thing together. At that point, my skill levels were basic HTML. And this was what I learned later to be a tab delimited database structure. So there were like text files that had data inside of them, and they were all like tabbed together to figure out where they all went. And so I started reading, and one manual pointed to another manual that pointed to another manual. And long story short, I just kind of set them to a side and I just started doing stuff. And I tried it and I saw what happened. And then I tried something else and I tried that, because the thing that our client requested of subcategories, it wasn't something that the system could do. It wasn't documented anywhere. You could just have like one category. So what I did is I started tinkering and I started messing around, and I figured out if I put some data in a different spot, the subcategories already displayed, and it was pretty amazing. So then I show Carl when he comes back from vacation. He's like, "Oh man, how did you figure this out?" And I'm like, "Dude, I don't even know. I just like tried a bunch of stuff, and this is what happened. I was just trying to think creatively about the context of what all this stuff was." Well, then there was a conference for the software, and my boss told them about it, and they're like, "No way." It became a feature almost immediately after that happened. And I thought that was pretty amazing. I wasn't technically a programmer at that point in time. I was just trying out different things using this context of, there's the Spark, which is the thing that I need to do. I started researching and seeing what was possible. Then I just started playing and reflecting back and forth on what those things were. So now I'm just going to quickly kind of walk through some of these, and some of them have some quick stories. So the Spark. The Spark is one of my favorite moments, and also one of my least favorite moments, because maybe it means that I'm feeling stuck, or I'm stunted, or I'm held back. Or the good side is that I'm in awe of something and I just saw something that just knocked me on my duff. And a quick story about a time that I was knocked on my butt is I saw this man speak, who's Golan Levin. He is a professor at CMU, and he's a creative coder, and he's absolutely amazing. This was a long time ago at a conference called Flash Pit 08. And what I saw was truly mind-blowing. He was turning his environments into playgrounds. They were interactive, using projections and all sorts of different things. And this is before the Kinect came out and all sorts of things like that. He was mixing performance and art and technology. He had audio, visual experiments and experiences. The user was the conductor, and he was the conductor of anything like I had ever seen before. It was amazing. So this particular presentation was, you could use your fingers to create these shadow puppets that created these shapes that would just kind of bloop around. They were amazing. And then this one is also amazing. You take these felt squares and rectangles and circles, and you put them along this grid. And as it passes along the grid, as it interacts with each one of the different blocks, it creates a different noise. So you're essentially making sound. It's absolutely amazing. And the thing that really blew me away is back in 2001, he created a cell phone orchestra when cell phones looked like this. So everybody registered their cell phone with Golan. They had a program that called certain people at certain times, and as that happened, it sounded like a song that was beyond just the ringtone. And the other thing to note is at this time, if you had a Nokia, there was already a certain ringtone that you had at that time. It was really super clever. So he's presenting all this stuff, and I'm realizing that I'm limiting myself because I'm just using software and I'm waiting for new features to allow me to be inspired. And he's out there creating new stuff. And I felt very constrained by the CRT monitors that we were using back in those days. And he's out there making software, making tools, and making experiences that could exist in the real world. And I didn't even know how that was possible. Like Photoshop didn't do those kinds of things. That wasn't something that happened in HTML, but through new languages that I never even heard about before. This whole new world kind of opened up, things like processing and stuff like that. It's absolutely amazing. At the same time I heard that presentation, I heard Ian Coyle speak, and Ian Coyle said something that basically just confirmed everything and shot my career off in a completely different trajectory. And he said passion projects are the things that move his career forward. So as soon as I got home from that conference, I started just experimenting with things that I loved, with interactivity and music. And I made this little puppet tool that could be controlled by keyboards and music and all sorts of things like that. And I started to share it with people, and I started to talk about it at different conferences and presentations, and it started to gain a little bit of steam. And then I got invited to speak at the very conference that I was just at a lowly attendee at the year before. And it was amazing. And I have a secret about what happened. The thing that I made had a bunch of bugs in it. It wasn't perfect, and nobody cared. They were mostly interested in my process. They were interested in my thinking, and they wanted to hear about how they could be inspired to do something similar. So the spark is something that kind of like triggers me to take action, to kind of do something. I either like get knocked on my butt because I'm like, I feel like that's something that I should know about, or I'm like, wow, that's really cool, I want to try. So in order to make any real progress on it, I have to start doing some research. And the curious mind is at work here, and I start to seek out more information. I hunt for things to read. I watch videos. I look for ways that I can participate, and I'm just really hungry for resources. And the most important thing that I do is I try to identify experts and seek out what they're doing and what they're offering. Almost always nowadays, there's a course, a video, a something that experts have released. Many times they are for free. And then I start to dig into their Twitter accounts and things like that, their Instagram accounts and whatnot, to see who inspires them. And I start to see an overlap on who those experts are. And that's where you really get to the good stuff. And once I've kind of amassed enough data to try things out, then I just kind of put together a quick little plan, and I start to experiment. And how do I do that? Well, I just ask myself some questions like, what would progress look like if I had to do something today, right now? What would I do just to move this forward? What does success look like? What does it not look like? Then I start to think about the return on my investment. And sometimes I can get in my own head like, oh man, like, am I prepared? Do I have time? Am I willing to make time? Can I toe dip? And then like, oh, it's so easy to talk yourself out of just about anything. And the thing that sometimes can creep into our brains is like, this has been done before, and how is this any different? Well, the thing that's different is that you're doing it, and you're going through the experiment, or you're going through the process of learning it. And you don't have to share everything. Like I knit, I make scarves and stuff, but I don't have like a store where I sell everything, and not everything has to be for commerce. Sometimes it's just something for you to learn how to do. So it doesn't have to be new. It doesn't have to be amazing. It just has to be you. It has to be your experience, and your experience is worth it. And so what I try to think about when I'm at this stage, whether I want to continue moving forward in the thing that I'm doing, is my desire to know and experience versus my insecurity and vulnerability. Sometimes my insecurity and vulnerability is too high, and it's like, I don't think that that's really something that I want to do. I don't need to know that bad, so I'm just going to take my effort somewhere else. Or sometimes I'm like, I'm really curious to see what would happen, and like, well, let me try this and let me try that. And it's okay to feel like you're not sure. Like, that's totally okay. And if you're not sure what to do, how to move forward, if you feel stuck but you want to try something, make a commitment. Commit to do something every day. If that's too much, commit to something every week. And if that's too much, commit to do something every month. Like, whatever is making progress on your schedule, then that is the right answer. The best guitar out there is the one that you play. So whatever works for you, that's the right answer. Then we get into the fun part, where you basically play and repeat, play and repeat, play and repeat. And so it kind of works like this. I start with a quick win. I try it out, and I see if something is related to my plan. And then something immediately goes wrong and it backfires. And in that moment, it's time to reflect. It's time for me to analyze what's my next move. If given the opportunity, what would I change for the next time? am I still curious about this? Did I meet my goal? If not, what's one thing that I would do to kind of change it? I make a new plan and I try again and I repeat, and then I just go back and back and back. And as far as guidelines for my reflection, I use the classic scientific method: make an observation, ask a question, form a hypothesis or testable explanation, make a prediction, test the prediction, and iterate. So that's nerd for like, what do I think I'm going to do? Okay, I think it's going to be this. Try it out. That totally didn't happen. I wonder why that didn't happen. I don't know. Maybe it's because of this. Well, let me try this thing over here. Oh, that didn't happen because of this. And when something doesn't go your way, what you have gained is not a failure. You've gained knowledge of what not to do. I like to think of it as a Zelda board, which, I mean, I'm old, so this dates me pretty well, but like in Zelda, there's a game board where there's a bunch of these squares all throughout the experience. And as you go through the game, you like open up a new board, you open up some more new boards, and you start to see like, hey, there's more that's out there. This is what I've been able to uncover. And I can also see that there's other things that I can't uncover. So there's some things that I don't know and I don't know about it, but I know that they're there. And then I get crazy or scared, or I mess something up, and I go back to just the things that I know. And then I start to expand back out. And then I go back to the things that I know. And I kind of do this over and over again until I make this expansion. It's almost like Swiss cheese knowledge of like, hey, these are kind of the areas that I know about. I know that I don't know enough about these things. I'm going to use those for later. And so that's kind of how I think about like building out knowledge. So this is my framework for tinkering. The spark, research, play, reflection, and now into my takeaways. So don't wait around for ideas that are good enough for you to work on. Start working on them today. I didn't have to quit my job in order to change my situation or my satisfaction. So here's a quick story about that. I was working at a medical technology company, and I was a senior developer. Imagine that. And I was getting bored. I was getting super bored. They weren't giving me any work. And I kept asking my boss, like, is there stuff that I can work on? And they're like, oh, we don't want to waste your talents on something that's below your level. And I'm like, that doesn't even make any sense. Like, you're paying me, I should be like doing something. So I felt like I was wasting my time. So I started to wander around the company and just talk to other people that work there. And I'm like, hey, what are you working on? And they're like, oh, I'm working on this. I'm like, you need a hand with it? And they're like, yeah, I would love to some help. And so then they showed me how to do stuff. And then I started to like work on things with those people. And then I went to another department and started doing that. And then I started to get recognized for being like a go-getter, and I got a promotion, which was completely ridiculous. I was just trying to find work to do. And I learned a lot of really interesting things. I could have just sat there and just like, I don't know, tinkered on the internet or whatever, but I used it as an opportunity to kind of like tinker within the organization to see what other people were working on. And I learned how to do some really amazing things that I still get to do today. And tinkering was at the heart of that. So if you want to get started, habit sharing is a really good thing to do. Habit sharing is taking something that you normally do every single day and add one extra thing along with it so that you can do both of those things. Rituals are a really good way to establish habits. Accountability, just telling people that you're going to do something and then following through on it, and just small tweaks. Don't try to like do 100 things tomorrow. Just try to do one small thing and then another small thing, maybe in a couple other days, and then another small thing. That's how you can really start to build some momentum. So final thoughts. Being a novice is okay. Vulnerability is a window into growth. Don't wait for opportunities, make them. Follow your curiosities. Expand your community and make friends with experts. Don't wait around for an idea that's worth your time. You don't have to quit your job to advance your career or to improve your life satisfaction. Don't interview for your dream job, create it. That's something that I did at a couple jobs ago, where I wanted to do more creative coding and interactive displays. And I started to create proposals and pitch things to some of the higher ups, and they took me up on it, and we made some really cool stuff. Another thing is to give yourself grace. There are seasons for everything. Now might not be the time for tinkering or for trying something new, but it might also be the perfect time. So you just kind of have to know yourself. When I got stuck at work, I followed my curiosities. I shared my work and my thoughts, and then opportunities started to present themselves and my work changed. Make stuff, share it, all of it, even the mistakes. Small tweaks are the progress. And if there are creative coders out there that I think that you should check out Seb Lee Delisle. He makes all kinds of amazing stuff with lasers and 3D printing and processing. It's fantastic. Golem Levin, he's got a bunch of his experiments that are up on his website. Daniel Schiffman has an amazing code book called Nature of Code that is all about natural systems. And I don't think there's anything better about creative coding than that. And that is basically what I wanted to talk about. So thank you very much. If you want to talk shop or share a beverage, let me know. That is my email address. Cool.
That was awesome. Thanks, man.
Yeah. Thoughts, questions, comments, reactions?
Hey, Julia, what do you think?
I'm still processing everything, but I thought it was a great presentation. I'm still taking it all in, so.
Cool.
I really love the notes that you're giving them, because those are some of the things that, you know, I think, you know, when you're establishing your career, you kind of forget along the way. And it's really easy to forget those, overlook them, and kind of impart that knowledge. So you really have to be tapped into a part of yourself to be able to recognize that and then teach it back. And I have no doubt that those that worked with you, worked under you, were able to really thrive and prosper as a result. So that's awesome.
I really like this idea of just like not ever being one thing.
Yeah.
Just like never letting yourself just be one thing, and always sort of that long list that sort of scrolled at the beginning, and like all the job titles and like other titles that you've had. I think that like when you're, especially like when you're going to school or when you're in your career, I think we let our identities become the things that we do instead of like being just one of the things that we do. And I really like this idea that like that could change tomorrow.
Yeah.
What I do today doesn't need to be what I'm always doing. And I think that just seeing that list sort of scroll, I think really resonated with me as well.
It reminds me. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, so a long time ago, I was hired as like a manager of Flash stuff, which was like an old internet technology. And while I was there, the writing was on the wall that was going away, and they needed to transition over to video presentations. And so it was like an e-learning company. And while I was there, instead of just like, well, that's not the thing I do, we kind of banded together and we went on location. We shot and interviewed a bunch of teachers. We put together, we shot and edited and curated a presentation for a submittal to the Department of Education for Pennsylvania. And we were awarded a grant for $1 million to continue the thing that we were doing. Like, and so like, we could have just like, well, you hired the wrong people, but we're like, well, we're going to figure out how all this connects together. Like, we're not audio experts, we're not video experts, but we don't necessarily have to be, because we're good storytellers. So why don't we use the creative thinking that we have and the storytelling that we have, and let's tell the best story that we can with maybe the limited technical abilities that we have, and we might learn something along the way. And I'm pretty sure that video department still exists today.
Cool.
I was getting thrown back to when I was in college, and I know you'll be able to relate to this. Like, the designers were designers. They were not marketers. They were not communicators. They were designers. And in some cases, they were also artists, but not all cases. And it was very rigid and set in stone. And like, there was always this gripe against, like, F the marketing people. They don't get design. Of course they don't. They don't need to. And so there was always like these divisions. And what ended up happening is a lot of my friends that I graduated with ended up becoming marketers, because in the design field, specifically in the industries that they were in, there was no pathway to promotion. And so like they had a hard time coming to grips with that. And you bet your butt, I absolutely tore them up. When when they're like, yeah, I'm going to become a marketer and I got to learn all this stuff. I'm like, well, you should have considered that you could have been both or more than that. So I think that's wonderful advice. And especially, when it comes to technology and all the new stuff that's been coming out, like you have to be able to adapt.
You have to be able to. I remember it was on the cusp of the aughts into the teens. There were graphic designers that were really concerned about like writing code and stuff like that. And then this new job title was emerging. And so they changed a word in their title. It was graphic designer and they changed it to UX. And at that time, it wasn't real UX. It was basically like graphic design for screen. But like most of the people didn't catch up to that. And so like it was really interesting to see these designers that were predominantly print overnight. By just like changing the job title, they were able to use the skill sets they had and translate it into a different context. And many of them are doing like some really killer stuff now,
Yeah. I'm actually teaching UX classes on top of web design and graphic design and marketing. And it's really cool to see, like, if it was a Venn diagram where all of the crossover is. And, one of the reasons momentum exists is it posits that like, hey, jobs are blending together. You got to be able to do a lot simultaneously. Necessarily like really immersive and deep or extremely well, but well enough to be able to provide a solution.
That's exactly right. And problem solving and the chutzpah to try.
Yeah.
There, you know what I mean? Like,
oh man, you nailed it. Like just the willingness to try and to be experimental and take some risk and be creative in that sense. That's most of the job. I mean, frankly, like a lot of these places aren't hiring for necessarily skill. Yeah, they want to see it's there, but they also want to hire a cool person that's willing to be like that. Because the skill development will come along with it.
That's absolutely right.
Unrelated, is that a Weezer poster behind you?
Oh, this is a thing that that I made a while ago. It's on a piece of wood.
Okay.
I did it for an art show in Bellevue a long time ago.
Oh my God.
Did you know about the Creative Treehouse?
No.
Oh, we used to have an artist collective in 521, 527. I don't know, one of the buildings there, we had an art collective called the Creative Treehouse, where you could come in and we had art shows and music. And we did like an art marathon that was 24 hours. Like,
wow.
Yeah. That was a long time ago, brother.
Yeah.
But this was made for that.
Well, I might need to bring it back. Well, that's my favorite band. So,
Oh, yeah, me too.
Yeah, you get points for me on that for sure. And then that Creative Treehouse thing, that's super cool. I'll have to ask you about that on the side. But,
oh, yeah. Man, that was a crazy fun time. We had sponsors for stuff. It was wild. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, this is great. Thanks. Thank you so much, Josh. Valerie, Julia, any other thoughts?
There is a comment in chat from Julia.
Yeah.
I'll just read it. It says, I think my favorite part of your presentation was how you discussed that you didn't have to quit your job to be creative. You were the one who creates the opportunity to be creative and go from there. Sometimes you just have to try something new and put a little bit of yourself into your work. And then she thanks you for your presentation.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there about like follow your passion, like, and I think along with that, it's like maybe quit your job and do something new. Like, I don't subscribe to that. Like my direct boss, when I was at the medical technology company, he wasn't giving me anything to do at all. And so I just kind of shopped around. Like there was a company of almost 100 people. There had to be something else that was going on. And I didn't want to rest on my laurels. And I found some really interesting stuff to work on. And then I got promoted because I did it, which is stupid. Like,
yeah,
I was basically getting paid to do nothing for a period of time. So like, there's almost always an opportunity. And even if it doesn't necessarily exist in your department, it might exist in another department, or you might meet somebody in another department that maybe knows somebody at a different job. Like there could be pathways that are there, but it doesn't always mean like, this sucks, I don't want to do anymore, and it's over. Like you can expand your wings and grow into different capabilities. Like that's what life is all about,
Mhm.
in my opinion.
Julia, as a matter of fact, today, something that happened is, where I'm at in the health sciences at Pitt, there's not a whole lot of creativity going on. So when I, joined my position there, I just started being creative on everything all the time. And now I've got people from all 6 schools asking me to do stuff for them. And sometimes it's as simple as that. Like you show one thing to someone and then it spreads like wildfire. And that's sort of how you build that reputation. And, I haven't even been on the job for, I think this will be coming up on the end of my 4th month. And I have deans reaching out to me saying like, hey, we really like you in the job that you're in, but we think you might really like this other thing that we're thinking about. I'm like, I've been here 4 months. Like what's going on here? And some of that is there's just such a lack of, I don't want to say talent, but untapped creative potential that they don't know how to kickstart it. So when they see it, they're like, oh my God, we got to grab it and bottle it up and take advantage of as much as possible. So one of the meetings I had today was like a potential promotion into an entirely new role. And I'm like, if this is what it takes, like I've barely worked here. Because Josh, to your point, like I have a boss who has no time for their employees. And it's like, what am I doing today? I don't know. I made up 2 meetings in different campus buildings, and then I rode my bike for 2 hours. So, I mean, it's just kind of ridiculous.
RJ, do you want me to stop recording?
I can edit that out.
I know you can. Just checking. I'm just checking.
But yeah, you can if you want. Yeah.